In the year 1327, in a forgotten medieval village called Grindelwaldich, a strange event began over something truly absurd: goose eggs. The village was small, poor, and mostly ignored by the kingdom, except by Lord Edgar, a nobleman obsessed with his prized goose, Lady Honkabeth. One morning, when she stopped laying eggs, Lord Edgar accused the villagers of stealing them. Furious, he imposed a goose tax, 1 egg per person, per day, to make up for the loss. The villagers, already struggling, found this ridiculous. Among them, a sarcastic blacksmith named Bertram, and others began quietly plotting rebellion. It started with whispers, secret meetings, and even honking codes. And thus, the rebellion began, not with swords, but with stolen bread and egg jokes, as the villagers formed a secret group they proudly called the Yolk Folk. The Yolk Folk, as the villagers now called themselves, began their quiet resistance. Meetings were held in the bakery's basement, where the smell of stale bread covered their plans. Their leader, surprisingly, was not a warrior, but Widow Marna, a sharp-tongued woman who once chased off tax collectors with a broom. She came up with a plan. Every villager would secretly stop giving eggs to Lord Edgar, instead painting rocks white and slipping them into his basket. For a week, it worked. Lord Edgar, oblivious and proud, held up the eggs in the town square, claiming victory over laziness and witchcraft. But then, one of the rocks cracked a tooth when his cook tried to make an omelet. Enraged, Edgar demanded triple the goose tax and accused the village of treason. The Yolk Folk knew they had little time left before things turned violent. So they took the next step, a secret midnight raid to rescue Lady Honkabeth herself, the goose at the center of it all. At the stroke of midnight, under a cloudy sky and the faint glow of lanterns, the Yolk Folk crept toward Lord Edgar's manor. Their goal, to steal back Lady Honkabeth, the goose whose eggs had started it all. Leading the group was young Tim, a lanky farm boy with a nervous twitch and a talent for sneaking. He had studied the manor's guards for weeks and knew they napped near the wine barrels after sunset. Slipping through the garden, the rebels dodged chickens, angry cats, and a statue of Edgar posing with a spoon. At last, they reached the coop. There she was, Lady Honkabeth, sitting proudly in a pile of fresh straw, completely unaware she was the most wanted goose in the kingdom. Widow Marna gently scooped her up, whispering, "You've caused enough trouble, bird." They made it out just in time, moments before a drunk guard stumbled out, tripped over a bucket, and raised the alarm. By sunrise, the entire village was in panic. Lord Edgar declared martial law and demanded every house be searched. But the Yolk Folk had already hidden Lady Honkabeth in the old windmill. The rebellion had officially gone from silly to serious. The windmill, dusty and half-collapsed, became the secret headquarters of the rebellion and Lady Honkabeth's new palace. She honked happily from a hay pile, completely unaware that her presence now meant open defiance of Lord Edgar's rule. Meanwhile, the village turned tense. Guards stormed homes, flipped tables, and even interrogated goats. Lord Edgar was furious. A goose thief is a threat to the crown. He shouted from his balcony, wearing his finest fur cloak, in July, but the more pressure he applied, the more united the villagers became. Children passed secret notes in eggshells. The blacksmith forged pitchforks and accidentally dropped them near certain doors. And late one evening, the village baker delivered dozens of fresh loaves with coded messages hidden in the crust. Even the local priest joined in, replacing hymns with lines like, "And the goose shall be set free." The village was preparing for something bigger now. No longer just a prank, it was turning into a full-fledged revolt. And then, out of nowhere, came a royal messenger. Dusty, tired, and clearly annoyed, he arrived with a scroll from the capital. It was a summons. Lord Edgar was ordered to explain the goose crisis to the king himself. Lord Edgar was furious when he read the royal summons. Being called to the king meant to things, travel, and accountability, to things he absolutely despised. Still, he couldn't disobey. So, dressed in his most ridiculous feathered hat, which he claimed showed loyalty to the goose, he set off toward the capital with his most loyal guards. The village, meanwhile, exploded into whispered cheers. With Edgar gone, the Yolk Folk had time to prepare for what they knew was coming next, a royal investigation. While the guards left behind tried to keep order, the villagers staged a perfectly normal life. They smiled, traded eggs, sang songs, and even hosted a fake festival apiece. Behind the scenes, however, plans were moving fast. Lady Honkabeth was relocated to a secret cart full of laundry. The priest was writing a speech. Widow Marna was teaching villagers how to protest without getting their heads chopped off. Meanwhile, in the capital, Lord Edgar faced humiliation. The king, tired and mildly confused, listened to Edgar rant about painted rocks, goose witchcraft, and seditious bread. After 2 hours, the king simply said, "Sort it out yourself. And stop sending me letters about poultry." Edgar returned home, humiliated and angrier than ever. The villagers knew the final showdown was coming soon. When Lord Edgar returned to Grindelonditch, he was no longer just angry. He was determined to crush the rebellion completely. He doubled the number of guards, ordered random arrests, and built a wooden stage in the square for public egg trials. One poor farmer was fined for owning a suspiciously round potato, but fear didn't work like Edgar hoped. The villagers were too far gone, united, clever, and quietly defiant. The Yolk folk stepped up their efforts. They carved goose symbols into doors to mark safe houses. Bertram the blacksmith started secretly forging armor pieces into pots and pans. The children created distractions by staging loud puppet shows with talking geese, while Widow Marna met with nearby villagers who were also tired of their lords. Soon, word of the Goose Rebellion spread beyond the village. Peasants in nearby towns started wearing white feathers in solidarity. A traveling bard even wrote a song called The Ballad of the Brave Beak. Lord Edgar couldn't believe it. "A goose cannot lead a revolution," he screamed, as yet another guard resigned after stepping in a hidden goose dropping. Then came the final blow, a letter nailed to the church door. It read, "If one more egg is taken, we march." It was unsigned, just a single white feather taped to the bottom. The clock was ticking. Tension hung over Grindelonditch like a storm cloud. The villagers were quiet, but not afraid. They were ready. The next morning, as the sun rose behind the crooked rooftops, Lord Edgar sent his guards door to door to collect the daily goose tax. But this time, no one complied. Not a single egg was handed over. Instead, each household gave the guards something else: feathers, white pebbles, or notes that simply said, "Cluck off." Furious, Edgar rode into the village square, red-faced and shouting, demanding that someone be punished. But before he could finish, a trumpet sounded from the hills. The villagers turned. Marching toward the square was a crowd of peasants from nearby towns, hundreds of them, waving banners with goose drawings and carrying loaves of bread like shields. At the front was Widow Marna, holding Lady Honkabeth high above her head like a sacred artifact. The goose honked once, loudly, as if giving a signal. The crowd began chanting, "No more eggs, no more lords." Edgar tried to shout back, but his voice was drowned out. His guards, overwhelmed and unsure, stepped aside. Bertram stepped forward with a scroll. It wasn't a declaration of war, it was a list of demands. Fair treatment, no egg tax, and the right to raise geese in peace. Edgar tore it up. The villagers didn't flinch. They were done asking nicely. The moment Lord Edgar tore up the villagers' demands, the crowd fell silent. Even Lady Honkabeth stopped honking. Then, quietly, Widow Marna stepped forward and said, "Very well. Then we take the manor." For a second, Edgar laughed, until he realized they weren't joking. The crowd surged forward, not with swords or fire, but with sheer determination. They marched up the hill, past confused guards, pushing open the manor gates with broomsticks, rolling pins, and a surprising number of large cheese wheels. Edgar ran inside, locking the doors, but Bertram, out with the help of a cart and 3 goats, broke through the back entrance. The manor was seized in less than 15 minutes. In the grand hall, Edgar stood atop a table, waving a ladle like a sword. "You'll never take me alive," he cried. A goose feather floated down onto his nose. He sneezed, slipped on a sausage, and knocked himself unconscious. And just like that, it was over. No blood, no fire, just a bruised ego, and a lot of breadcrumbs. The villagers carried Edgar outside and placed him in a wheelbarrow labeled "Return to Sender." They didn't kill him. Instead, they sent him back to the capital with a note that read, "Retired. Please send someone less ridiculous." The manor became a shared village hall. And Lady Honkabeth, she laid 3 eggs the next morning, all perfectly normal. With Lord Edgar gone, the village of Grindalon entered what they later called the Age of Mild Happiness. The manor became a community center where people met, laughed, and finally got to eat their own eggs in peace. A new system of shared leadership was formed, led by Widow Marna, Bertram the blacksmith, and oddly enough, the village baker, who insisted on being called Minister of Crumbs. Word of the rebellion spread far and wide. Other villages began standing up to their own petty lords, and white feathers became a symbol of quiet resistance across the region. Even a few nobles resigned voluntarily, claiming they were allergic to birds. As for Lord Edgar, he reportedly took up poetry in the capital and released a failed book titled The Goose That Betrayed Me. Meanwhile, Lady Honkabeth lived out her days in peace, fed daily by children, and occasionally carried around on a pillow like royalty. Now, was any of this written in the royal records? Of course not. Official history called it a brief dispute over agricultural taxation, but in Grindalon they remembered it clearly, the time a goose inspired a rebellion, overthrew a noble, and laid the foundation for the strangest moment in medieval politics, all because of a few missing eggs. Years passed, and the story of the Great Goose Rebellion slowly faded from the grand halls of kings and scholars. It never made it into textbooks or royal scrolls. After all, what respectable historian would admit that a goose caused a political uprising? But in the village of Grindalon the tale lived on. Every spring, they held the Feast of the Feather, where villagers dressed as geese, threw fake eggs, and reenacted the moment Edgar slipped on a sausage. Children grew up learning the tale not as a joke, but as proof that even the smallest act of defiance, a fake egg, a hidden note, a single honk, could topple something unjust. Lady Honkabeth eventually passed away peacefully, and her feathers were kept in a wooden box, placed beside the community bell. As for the villagers, they never went back to quiet obedience. They had discovered something rare, that unity, humor, and a little absurdity could defeat even the loudest tyrant. And so, the goose became a legend, not for flying, but for helping people rise. Narrator Dry Voice. And that, dear listeners, was the story of the most boring, ridiculous, completely real medieval rebellion in history. Real in spirit, possibly not in exact detail. Probably didn't involve cheese wheels, but who's checking? Until next time, stay feathered, stay fearless, and for the love of history, never underestimate a goose.